From the time we're young, most of us are taught to see ourselves through a lens of lack. We interrupt without meaning to, and then stay up all night replaying it. We need 4 alarms to get out the door, and still forget our keys. We ask too many questions, or go completely silent. We talk for 10 minutes straight, then forget what the question was. We stim under the table, mask in meetings, crash in private. We tune out during small talk, but remember the exact wording of a comment from 5th grade. We cry when we're overwhelmed, or we go numb. We shut down completely. We're told our needs are excessive, our interests are weird, our timing is off, that we're selfish, inappropriate, lazy, dramatic, that we should be more adaptable, more normal, more palatable. By the time many of us hear the word neurodivergent, we've already absorbed the message that we are a problem to be solved, that we're failing at being human. And it's not just personal, it's systemic. School reports, therapy notes, diagnostic manuals, IEPs, HR evaluations, they all reinforce the same narrative. You're not doing it right. You're lagging behind. You're deficient. Even in spaces that try to be supportive, there's often an undertone of how do we fix this, or how do we help you catch up? It's exhausting. It's dehumanizing, and it erases the reality that we've been adapting our whole lives to environments that were never designed for us. What if that's the real problem? Not our sensory sensitivity, not our executive dysfunction, not our stimming or our scripts or our struggle to sit still, but the assumption that there's only one correct way to communicate, to focus, to learn, to be. What if autistics and ADHDers have been surviving in a world that misunderstands us and in the process have developed entire bodies of language, strategies, insights, community wisdom, things that aren't always seen or named, but that shape how we move, connect, create, and resist. Hi, I'm Essie. I'm an autistic and ADHD therapist. And today I want to talk about what happens when we flip the script from deficit to cultural wealth. Because neurodivergent communities hold powerful forms of knowledge. We've built ways of surviving, communicating, noticing, and caring that deserve to be named, not just as adaptations, but as culture. In this video, I'm going to introduce a framework I call neurodivergent cultural wealth. We'll look at 7 specific forms of cultural capital that show up in autistic and ADHD lives, not always in the way that dominant culture values, but in the ways that keep us alive, connected, and resilient. When we as neurodivergent folks are subjected to criticism, it's easy to take it personally. But these criticisms, they're baked into the systems around us. Education, psychology, mental health, the workplace, even well-meaning interventions tend to operate from one baseline assumption. You're not functioning the way you're supposed to. That framework has a name. It's called the deficit model. It defines us by what we lack. A lack of attention, a lack of social intuition, a lack of motivation, organization, flexibility, resilience. And when an entire system sees you through that lens, it doesn't just affect how others treat you, it starts shaping how you see yourself. You don't just walk into therapy thinking you need support, you walk in thinking you're broken. And even when the language gets gentler, like challenges, struggles, areas for growth, the framework is still the same. Your brain is a problem. Your behavior is a problem. You are a problem. And the goal is to reduce, correct, or mask it until you pass as functional enough. It's exhausting, it's invalidating, and it hides something deeper, that neurodivergent people aren't failing at life, but rather being measured against standards that were never made with us in mind. And here's the trickiest part. Even strength-based language can fall into this trap. We hear things like, you might be socially awkward, but at least you're great at math. Or you may struggle with structure, but you're so creative. That's not a true reframe. That's a bargain. It says, we'll tolerate your difference as long as you compensate for it. What's missing from all of this is the idea that we already hold value and knowledge, that neurodivergent people have developed entire ways of thinking, relating, organizing, and resisting that aren't lesser, but different. And that those differences aren't individual so much as cultural. They come from community, from lived experience, from years of surviving systems that weren't designed for us. If deficit thinking says you don't measure up, cultural wealth asks, what have you built in order to survive? Because the truth is, neurodivergent people have always been adapting. We've built systems in our heads to track the 10 things we're masking in real time. We've taught ourselves to read emotional subtext like a second language. We've created entire routines, rituals, hacks, and heuristics just to navigate basic tasks. We weren't handed a rulebook for this world. So we wrote our own. And that takes incredible intelligence. This shift from deficit to cultural wealth comes from the work of scholars like Dr. Tara Yosso, who challenged the idea that marginalized communities are lacking what the dominant group values. Instead, she asked, what if we recognized the forms of capital, of strength, skill, and knowledge that already exist within these communities? Not in spite of their oppression, but because of how they've adapted to it. And that question sparked something in me. Because neurodivergent people, we do that too. We memorize people's patterns, when they're most responsive, what topics make them shut down, the exact tone of their I'm fine, that means they're not, just so we can keep the connection alive. We know how to assess a room within 5 seconds, noise level, seating options, escape routes, because we have to. We track every little cue in a conversation so we don't mess up, and then need 2 hours alone to recover. These are all skillful adaptations. We just haven't been taught to see it as culture. But that's exactly what it is. It's knowledge we build alone, out of necessity, but somehow we all end up building versions of the same thing. Individual, but collective. Ways of surviving, caring, expressing, resisting. That's what I mean when I say neurodivergent cultural wealth. And it's time we named it. What does neurodivergent cultural wealth actually look like? I've identified 7 forms, deeply patterned ways of surviving, sensing, and connecting that show up again and again in neurodivergent lives, whether we have language for them or not. Let's start with the first. Perceptual capital. This is the ability to perceive the world in ways others don't. You might pick up on the tension in a room before anyone speaks. You might track the rhythm of a conversation like a song. You might remember the layout of a space from 5 years ago, or notice when someone's tone is 2 degrees off from baseline. You might see a pile of tangled threads and intuitively know where to pull. Autistics often spot inconsistencies others miss. ADHDers might draw connections across ideas, patterns, or systems that seem unrelated on the surface. This is deep attunement. It's the ability to sense nuance in chaos, and it's cultural. Cognitive flexibility capital. Yes, we're often called rigid, but the truth is we've been adapting our entire lives. We rework plans on the fly when executive dysfunction hits. We create intricate routines to manage overwhelm. We switch between unfinished tabs, half-finished projects, and still find ways to connect the dots. Autistics might build systems for every contingency. ADHDers might jump between nonlinear insights to find a solution no one else thought of. This is patterned flexibility under pressure. We don't follow the path, we instead forge one. Survival strategy capital. As neurodivergents, we learn to mask, to script, to camouflage, to stay safe. We rehearse conversations, memorize normal phrases, build social algorithms to pass for fine. It's exhausting, it's often trauma-born, but it's also a kind of intelligence, a hard-earned survival strategy. And we don't keep it to ourselves. Online, in group chats, in meme threads, and late-night DMs, we teach each other how to pass or how to stop passing. What's safe, what isn't, that's cultural knowledge, community forged. Sensory ecological capital. We often have a rich relationship with our sensory worlds. We track what others miss, how the hum of a light changes a room, how shirt seams press too sharp, how a certain smell can derail an entire day. We build environments that help us function. Blackout curtains, familiar textures, weighted blankets, the exact right hoodie. Rooms lit with lamps instead of overhead lights. Playlists that soothe or spark movement. Fidget tools that help us focus and self-regulate. We notice what overstimulates and what restores. what throws us into shutdown, what lets us come back to ourselves. We carry sensory maps of our environment. We adjust constantly, and that's a form of wisdom born from living in bodies that have to notice. Community care capital. In neurodivergent communities, care often looks different. Info dumping as affection, sending each other spreadsheets or memes, or hyperfixation updates. Sitting in parallel silence because neither of you has the energy to speak, but you still feel connected. We don't always do checking in the neurotypical way, but we co-regulate in the ways that make sense to us. We say I love you by programming reminders, adjusting someone's lights, or quietly sharing our last dopamine snack. We normalize meltdown recovery. We know the language of overwhelm. We don't shame each other for shutting down. This is care, and it's ours. Narrative resistance capital. We've been handed so many stories as neurodivergents about who we are. Disordered, unmotivated, rigid, lazy, broken. And still, we write back. We reclaim language like autistic or ADHD. We push back against pathologizing frameworks. We share our truths on blogs, comics, TikToks, Discord servers. We build community around counter-narratives, that we are not defective, we are divergent. This is narrative resistance capital. And it matters, because stories, they shape reality. Whether we reauthor our own stories or change how others see us and how we see ourselves. System navigation capital. Navigating the world as a neurodivergent person takes serious skill. We learn how to explain our needs in systems that don't understand them. We prep for doctors who don't believe us. We figure out what to say in an IEP meeting or HR meeting or therapy intake to be taken seriously. We learn disability rights the hard way and pass that knowledge to each other. We crowdsource accommodations. We warn each other about red flags. We write email drafts for friends who are too burned out to advocate. This is system navigation capital, and it's built through community, not just individual bootstrapping. So why name this? Why call it cultural wealth instead of just coping or traits or quirks? Because naming has power. Because when you name something as valuable, it stops being invisible. It stops being shameful. It stops just being your problem to manage. Instead, it becomes part of a bigger picture, something shared, something collective, something that connects you to a lineage of others who've been surviving, adapting, and resisting in their own ways. And when we start seeing our adaptations as intelligence, not inadequacy, our communities as culture, not pathology, our communication as valid, not broken, something shifts. It doesn't erase the challenges, executive dysfunction, burnout, medical trauma, ableism, none of that disappears. But it reframes the story. It says you are not less than, you are not behind, you are not a mistake. You are part of a cultural group with its own forms of knowing, relating, and caring. And those forms matter. So whether you're someone navigating this as a neurodivergent person or working as a therapist, educator, parent, or ally, this reframe can change the way you see yourself. It can change the way you see others. And it can change the kinds of questions we ask. Not, how do we fix you? But what are you already doing that's brilliant, even if no one's recognized it yet? What strengths have you developed in response to systems that weren't made for you? What do you know deep in your body, in your routines, in your relationships, that deserves to be called wisdom? Neurodivergent people carry wealth, not just in what we produce, but in how we survive, in how we sense, care, resist, and imagine, in how we create meaning on our own terms. And it deserves a world that sees it. If something I said today resonated with you, if you recognized yourself in these patterns, I hope you'll hold that as proof of your insight, your resilience, and the deep self-awareness you've earned. If this video felt helpful, feel free to like, subscribe, and share it with anyone you think might need to hear these words too. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.